Hey everybody, I'm Kris White with the American Battlefield Trust. Thank you so much for following us through the state of North Carolina and through Petersburg, through all of our videos. We're finally getting to wrap up here in North Carolina. We're at Bennett Place. It's a state historic site here founded in 1923, but we've been to Wilmington. You've seen Fort Fisher. We've been to Guilford Courthouse out in Greensboro. We've been to Petersburg, all over the place with Will Green and Doug Ullman. So be sure to check out all of our videos. Please share these on Facebook, share them on YouTube, and think about supporting the American Battlefield Trust over at battlefields.org. So, what are we doing here at Bennett Place? We're looking at the visitor center right behind us, and the visitor center here at Bennett Place is a great resource to come here and to learn more about the largest surrender of the American Civil War. When people think of the end of the Civil War, they usually stop at April 9th of 1865, and that will be when Robert E. Lee surrenders the Army of Northern Virginia, his single army, to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. But the story doesn't end there. There's actually a lot of things happening from March into April and even into May of 1865. And what we have to do is, for a moment, back up before we go and visit James and Nancy Bennett's farm here in Durham, North Carolina. So we were at Bentonville. What happens there? Joe Johnston and his Army of the South is going to be defeated in 3 days of battle, pull back to Smithfield, North Carolina. As he pulls back towards Smithfield, what Johnston is starting to do is think about what are his next moves. William T. Sherman and his multiple armies are coming together. We have John Schofield coming in from the east from Wilmington. Coming up from the south, we have that army group of the Army of the Tennessee and the Army of Georgia with Henry Slocum and Oliver Otis Howard. They're all going to come together, and there's 90,000 Yankees now in pursuit of Joe Johnston and his army that is starting to fall apart. Johnston is facing some major problems. Supply problems will be his first issue. Wilmington has now been shut down, and now he has to fall back towards Raleigh, which is the state capital. Once he gets into Raleigh, he's not going to stop, and the people of Raleigh immediately know that their Confederate defenders are going to keep moving off towards the west, off towards Greensboro, High Point, out in the direction about 60 to 80 miles to the west of Raleigh. So the state capital will fall to William T. Sherman and his Union armies, and then what is going to start to happen are things around us will start to fall apart for Joe Johnston. The first major problem that he runs into is that he has to keep his supplies open. He has a very tenuous supply line coming up from Georgia up into North Carolina because the railroads are going to be his lifeline. He's going to meet with Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, who is now on the run because Richmond has fallen, and he is now moving south into North Carolina to meet with his two ranking generals, who are Joe Johnston and Pierre Gustave Toutant Beauregard. And pretty much what Davis wants to do is keep the fight going if possible. He wants to, at one point, get rid of the army, get rid of the infantry, and get all of his horsemen, his cavalry together, and go and take this almost guerrilla warfare to the Union Army. And Johnston's kind of in a rock and a hard place. Here's the civil government saying, we got to keep fighting. But here's the reality of the situation, and that is that Sherman's armies are now pushing up towards him. He has Grant, who's now free because Johnston finds out that Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia has surrendered. And now Joe Johnston, very much a realist, is going to start seeing the writing on the wall, and he'll start corresponding with William T. Sherman. But before he does that, let's take a walk down the old Hillsborough Road. This would be the old road that would bring you in from Durham Station. Durham Station, if you're familiar with Durham, North Carolina, if you're familiar with the movie Bull Durham, is actually built on Bull Durham's Stadium today. Or I'm sorry, Bull Durham's Stadium, or Durham Bulls Stadium, is built right on where Durham Station was. It's not the stadium they filmed the movie in, where Kevin Costner and Susan Sarandon was in, but it is the modern Durham Bulls Stadium. And at that point, you will be able to take the train out to Raleigh, out to Greensboro, and that is largely where Joe Johnston Army is stationed, around Greensboro, North Carolina, and some points in that direction. So as we move down the Hillsborough Road, we're approaching James and Nancy Bennett's farm. The Bennetts have a modest 189-acre farm here near Durham Station. We would have come right down the old Hillsborough Road. This is the old road trace that would bring you right up to their front door. Now, the home was constructed around 1849, but unfortunately, the home is going to burn around 1921, 2 years before this becomes a state historic site. So the house that you see behind me is actually a historic home. It is not the Bennett farmstead itself. This home is actually from a very similar home that was from just down the road, and some state historic site folks are like, hey, that looks a lot like what the Bennett farm would look like. Let's take it apart, put it back onto the Bennett farm. And that's what you have here behind us. So it's a historic home. It's not James and Nancy's home itself though, but it looks very similar to what would have been here in 1865. Also along the old Hillsborough Road is this Unity Monument that was placed here in 1923. You might be able to make out two pillars. One's for the Union, one's for the Confederacy, the North and for the South. And whenever they come back together to dedicate this monument in 1923, you can actually see they have pictures from down here, which are fantastic. We'll add some of those into the video. And you can see the old burned out home. You can see a lot of people down here gathered, including William T. Sherman's grandson, who will be here for the unveiling of this monument. The monument itself was supported by a man named Samuel Tate, who's from around the area. He's also a supporter to turn this into a state historic site. So this has been a state historic site for nearly 100 years. And we're here walking up on James and Nancy Bennett's farm. Again, it's a modest farm, about 189 acres. These folks are not slave owners. These are what we would think of as subsistence farmers. And the war has really come to their home a few times. Joe Johnston, William T. Sherman will hold surrender negotiations here 3 separate times in April of 1865, the 17th, the 18th, and the 26th. As they meet here, what we will also see is people who have been ravaged by war. They've lost a son-in-law who was part of the 46th North Carolina to war. They lost a son to who was in the 27th North Carolina to war, and another son who died in the midst of the war here at the Bennett place of disease. So these are people who know hardships, and whenever the two armies need a place to meet to talk about surrender, which we'll get to here in a moment, they're going to eventually come here to James and Nancy's farm. You can see, like I said, it's a modest farm here. On the other side, we have a chimney. We have our summer kitchen, because you don't want to cook here during the summer, especially in North Carolina. It's going to be pretty hot. And also you got to worry about fires burning down your home. They have the well on the other side of the Hillsborough Road, which has a big pole. You can dip the bucket down into the well. So it is a working farm, about 189 acres at the time of the war. So how do we get here? It's a very long story, but we'll make it short. In mid-April, Joe Johnston, the Confederate Army of the commander here with the Army of the South, is going to decide that he is about ready to talk about surrender. He's going to find out that Robert E. Lee's army has surrendered. He had hoped to push after Bentonville up through North Carolina, and eventually link with Robert E. Lee, who was in Petersburg, Virginia, maybe somewhere around the North Carolina-Virginia border. That's now not going to happen because Lee's army has surrendered. So Johnston's going to send word to William T. Sherman. He is going to say, let's start surrender negotiations. Well, he doesn't hear from Sherman for almost 2 days, because his cavalry commander, Sherman's cavalry commander, a guy named Judson Kilpatrick, also known as Kill Cavalry, gets this message and holds on to it for 2 days. Finally gives it to Sherman. And Sherman's like, we have to do something about this. He's going to read Kilpatrick the Riot Act for holding on to this very important message. And eventually, the two men are going to decide to meet between the lines. Sherman over in Durham will get on a train at Durham Station. He will come over here. He's going to get off, ride up the Hillsborough Road. He's going to meet with Joe Johnston and his staff, who say, there's a farm up here, James and Nancy Bennett's farm. We've agreed that we can meet here. Also out here will be Wade Hampton and Judson Kilpatrick, the two sides who are the two cavalry leaders for the respective sides. Sherman and Johnston will go inside of the modest home, which we will do in a moment. And as they go inside, Sherman is going to hand Johnston a note. Johnston at first probably thought it was a little strange that Sherman wanted to meet with him one-on-one. The note that Sherman hands to Johnston is a note that Sherman himself had just received. It was a coded message that came in from Washington, and that was the fact that President Lincoln had died on April 15th at 7:22 in the morning, assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. So as the two come inside, we come up into the Bennett home. very modest home, as I said. Johnston realizes at this point that this could be very terrible for the South in more than one way. Wilkes Booth is going to scream "Sic Semper Tyrannis," thus always the tyrants, whenever he shoots Lincoln and jumps onto the stage at Ford's Theater. So it's very much he thinks, Wilkes Booth does, that this is something that the South wanted. Turns out in a few days that he finds out that many Southerners were aghast at what John Wilkes Booth had done, and especially here Joe Johnston, because he felt he could lose a bargaining chip here as he's trying to come up with the best terms for his army. So Sherman and Johnston meet in this home, and as they meet, they're going to talk for a while, and eventually Johnston is going to offer a very enticing surrender, and that is that he can surrender all of his armies under his command. This is about 90,000 men. I think it's about 89,240 to be exact, that he has from North Carolina down to Florida and out towards the Gulf Coast. So Sherman says, this is not something I was prepared for. Can we meet again? And they will come back here on April the 18th, the next day. When they come back here on April the 18th, John Breckinridge, the Secretary of War for the Confederacy, is also here. Sherman's a little put back by this because Breckinridge is a politician technically, because he's part of President Jefferson Davis's cabinet. So if I enter into negotiations with him, I might be actually negotiating with the civilian side of the Confederacy. And I'm a military man. I can't do this. Well, Johnston and Breckinridge are both going to retort something along the lines of, well, he's technically also a major general in the Confederate Army, so you can talk to him on the military level. Good enough for Sherman. Sherman's like, all right, let's do this. They sit down and they start to talk about the surrender negotiations. And Breckinridge is going to start basically holding court. The former vice president, the former lawyer, is just going to, basically dictate the terms of what's going to happen in the next phases here. And Sherman will stop him at one point and say, gentlemen, who is surrendering to who here at Bennett Place? And after a while, it comes out that, okay, here are our surrender terms. Sherman, who is very much looked at as a villain in the South, is very magnanimous in surrender. He's thinking about what Lincoln said, let him up easy. So they talk about allowing the state governments to stay in power, these Confederate state governments, to keep the continuity. Talk about personal property, keeping their own personal property throughout the South, which would include slaves, which is a very dicey subject at this point, as we start seeing the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments starting to come to life in Washington, D.C. Then we also start to see that the Confederates can keep their arms. They can do a lot of things. It's very, very open terms for Sherman. And Sherman says, okay, let's do this. Let's sign these papers. Let's get this war over with. If you're going to surrender 90,000 soldiers, let's do this thing. So they come in here, they sit down, they're going to start working out these proceedings, not on this table, but a table of this sort. You'll start to see, thank you, Gary, behind the camera, you'll start to see these guys work out what's going on here. And now we start to see the surrender terms be accepted. Okay, and I use quotation marks for a reason. What ends up actually happening is these are sent north to Washington, and President Andrew Johnson, remember he's the new president of the United States, he's aghast at what Sherman wants here. He's giving them basically personal property. He's giving away the house. They had just won the war, essentially, the North, is what some of these men are thinking. And they're saying, no, you can't do this. You can only give the same terms of surrender that Grant gave at Appomattox Courthouse. And guess what? We're going to send Grant south to Raleigh to relieve Sherman. We can't let Sherman get away with this. So think about this, the great conqueror of the South, the villain of the South, who is giving too lenient of terms for the Southerners, now is turning into a marked man in the North. Grant arrives in Raleigh a few days later, sits down with Sherman, and the two of them talk about what's going to happen here. And Grant does not enter into the negotiations. He knows that Johnston and Sherman have a good rapport. So what are we going to do? We're going to allow them to work out these terms of surrender. He also knows, Grant does, that Johnston's men are really up against the wall. There's nothing more that they can do. So Sherman and Johnston start to communicate again. Hostilities are going to have to start again because they can't accept these surrender terms in the North. Johnston says, whoa, let's meet again. Sherman's like, yeah, let's meet again. Grant's all for it. They come back here for a third time. And on April 26, 1865, the two sides do come to those same Appomattox terms, that agreement, that personal baggage will be allowed to be kept by the Confederates. Many of them will be able to keep their personal horses. Wagons for military purposes will now be used to transport men home, and each one of the men of the Army of Tennessee, of the Department of North Carolina, this Army of the South, will start to receive paroles. These paroles, as you can see, is Greensboro, North Carolina. That's largely where the Confederate Army is going to be based, around High Point, Burlington, Greensboro, out to the west of here. These men will receive a parole. Now, these paroles are very important. Number one, we are going to use these if we're a Confederate to go to any Union depot to draw rations. We can ride any Federal train to get home. We can even draw a clothing allotment to get out of here. This also says that I have been basically pardoned by the federal government and I'm allowed to go home. Now that may change down the road, but they're going to get these, they're able to go home. So with that, we now have these paroles that will start to be printed. Ironically, the man who prints them owns a printing press in Greensboro, North Carolina. He had served in the Army of Northern Virginia, had just been paroled from the Army of Northern Virginia, comes back to Greensboro only to print the paroles at his printing shop for Johnston's army. It's kind of one of those ironies of the war. So now Johnston and Sherman agree. This isn't going to be like Appomattox, where we have the passing of the armies, as it were. We have Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain with that famous scene of him and John Gordon saluting each other. This is actually going to be the Confederates self-policing themselves. Most of the Confederates are 60 to 80 miles away from the Union armies in Greensboro, in Raleigh. So the 104th Ohio will show up in Greensboro. They will relieve the 7th South Carolina, who are a provisional unit out there, of their guard duties. It's a very interesting procession that takes place. One Union man comes up, takes his guard post, and relieves the Confederate, and they fall in line and march away together. Then the Confederates themselves will get together, stack arms, furl them, and leave them to be taken by the federal government. Every 8th man was allowed to keep his sidearm. So that is what we start to see. This isn't the great surrender that we see at Appomattox, but it is a much larger surrender. This will start to take place from Bennett Place, from Durham, all the way down into Florida, and almost 90,000 Confederate soldiers in one fell swoop will surrender. Shortly thereafter, we'll see men like Richard Taylor, Edmund Kirby Smith. They will start to surrender out west. They see that the writing is on the walls. A lot of things have happened in April of 1865. So Bennett Place kind of falls, in a way, off to the side of the war. We have Robert E. Lee surrendering, the fall of Petersburg and Richmond, and I'm a little out of order. We also have the assassination of President Lincoln, and now we have a surrender of more Confederate armies here. But Joe Johnston and William T. Sherman, bless you, Gary, they will, we're gonna head outside here, will actually form a friendship of sorts after this, a mutual respect. The old Army, these officers always knew one another. Even if they didn't serve together, they at least knew of each other. But after the war, they will have a respect for one another. And actually, Joe Johnston is a pallbearer later in life for William T. Sherman. And as the story goes, Joe Johnston, who will contract pneumonia because he wouldn't wear a hat at Sherman's funeral in a cold, driving rain, will die just a few weeks after Sherman's funeral. He also had heart condition. That may have played into it as well. Now, these two men will really start to show what they were trying to do here. They will come together. They will try to bring an end to this war. And the two men have a great friendship. Now, that's not to say what else happened out here. Right out in the front lawn, as they were first meeting on April 17th, during the first meeting, they're going to hear a kerfuffle, as it were. And they're going to come out the front door to find Wade Hampton, all 6'2" or 3 of him, big burly man in command of Johnston's cavalry, facing off against 5'3½" Judson Kilpatrick out in the front lawn. The two of them were ready to bring their cav out into a field and end it that way, old school cavalry style. That's how they're going to end it. These two had to be broken up. While these two men who are in charge of the two armies are inside trying to find that common ground, their hot-headed cavalry officers will still be out here fighting with one another all the way up till the end. Now, one of the cool things that we do have here, even though Bennett Place, the Bennett house burns in 1921, we actually have the original chimney. So you can come out here to Bennett Place, actually touch the chimney, and you can see this brass plaque that we have here telling you that the original house burned on October 12th, 1921. 2 years later, this becomes a North Carolina State Historic Site. So if you come down here to Bennett Place, you can go see their video. They have a great orientation video. They have a museum, a gift shop. Everyone loves a gift shop. Most importantly, they have restrooms, but they also have guided tours of the Bennett Place. You can come out here throughout the year and visit. I think we're just past we're on the 156th anniversary of the surrender here at Bennett Place. So if you're out ever in the Raleigh-Durham area, be sure to make your way out to Bennett Place. And with that, I think this will wrap up our video swing through North Carolina and Southern Virginia. On behalf of the American Battlefield Trust, I'm Kris White. I want to thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting battlefield preservation. Please share this with your friends. Please share this with your family, and go over to battlefields.org and become a member of the American Battlefield Trust and support our next video swing somewhere out west.